Greetings and good Monday evening, early evening, late afternoon. Still the 8th of May, 2023. Just got off work momentarily, getting ready to go to the gym. But I wanted to put this out there because I had an opportunity at work to listen to Steven Crowder. And I took down some notes because he addressed a lot of different issues, trying to stay on the same topic, but kind of, bing, 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 pinballing around. Once again, it's still the third decade of the 21st century. Some of these issues, I don't know if they really have a timeline associated with them, but nevertheless, I'll do my best to try to make my points. So I took notes of what Steven was talking about in some fashion of an order. So one of the first things he started talking about with any kind of in-depth was the reparation in California. Some different thoughts on this. As somebody who grew up in the North, as somebody who grew up despising Southern bigotry and some of the ideologies that the South represented, pre and post Civil War up until a certain time frame, where I think the South is more representative of what the North used to be. I think if you really want to make an argument, is that the former Confederate states have flipped in temperament and ideology and humanity and civility with the former northern states and western states that didn't quite exist at the time of the Civil War, who didn't participate in massive amounts of federal level, state level bigotry and whatnot. So there's this big push in the state of California to push for reparations. And on the outset, I would have said reparations would have been a good idea in a relatively early post-Civil War environment for the recently freed African slaves. As many of you are probably aware, slavery was not new, nor was it new to the colonies. What was different was that there was this proliferation and evolution of the slave trade to become significantly based on Africans, where as everything happens, somebody has something that somebody wants, it becomes popular. Like Columbus looking for trade routes to get to India for spices and whatnot, and he landed in America, so to speak, the Bahamas. The African slave trade evolved to surpass the servitude of any other ethnic group. And it specifically grew in the American colonies, where there was a need for the labor, and farmers needed cheap labor because they didn't have the machines, like the cotton gin and whatnot. So we have a very unfortunate evolution of the African slave trade in the colonies, specifically the southern portion of the United States. And because people do what people do, they have to find ways to live with themselves. They have to find ways to justify their actions. They dehumanized them. They came up with all different ways to dehumanize the Africans. And that was their way of justifying how this was righteous and whatnot. In a post-Civil War environment, I probably would have been all for reparations based on this systemic bigotry. Unfortunately, this would go on for at least an additional 100 years. High 90s, if not 100, before the Civil Rights Act. And that doesn't mean in a post-Civil Rights Act world, the South just automatically was like, you know what, damn it, we've had it wrong this whole time. I think it took a while before some of the traditionalists were eventually bred out. And I mean, like the children, and I've talked about this numerous times, the children of white Southerners raised by black nannies began to have a different view and a different perspective and a different thought process, and that's what ultimately changed the South. Reparations in California? I don't know. California was never a slave state. However, I do agree with the premises that we are the United States of America, which means each state is legally allowed to maintain a semblance of identity, a sense of individuality. If the state of California decides that that's ultimately what they want to do, is give people who may or may not be able to trace their ancestry to servitude, regardless of what's the word they use? Statute of limitations. If you can somehow, I don't know what they're going to do to determine this. I don't know at what point they're going to be like, you know, you get some but you don't, you know, like you get a car but you don't. I don't know. Curiously enough, though, I wonder of all the people that may or may not receive reparations, how many will use that money wisely, how many will squander it, and whether or not that money will be taxed. If they'll consider the reparations taxable income and it'll get taxed and taxed at the appropriate modern day rates, I have no idea. So it's kind of like, we're going to give you some money, but it's like laundering. We're going to give you money from the state of California, but we're going to take a good portion of that money back because California's got outrageous taxes. I don't know. Stephen had a different point of view. He looked at it from a different lens. You can watch his video. And then Stephen took a significant amount of time to talk about this, the mass shooter in Texas, which is a tragedy. Anytime somebody reaches the point where death is the ultimate outcome and they wish to indiscriminately take out others, it's a tragedy. How often this happens, I don't know, as far as just person being upset, person killing people, to include strangers. I don't know. I'm sure we live in a society here in the United States where we would definitely hear about it regardless. But the one that's picked up tremendous popularity, if for no other reason, thanks to, oh God, hang on, I gotta pause because this means a lot to me. All right, so I had to look it up. April 20th, 1999, Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold were the Columbine shooters. Tragically, there's a whole generation, I think Gen Z or millennials, that have no idea about this event and the significance of it. But essentially, they did a mass shooting at a school and they got a tremendous amount of attention for it. And I think I gotta try to choose my words carefully. I think what it did was it set the precedence that for anybody feeling a similar emotion, using a firearm to indiscriminately shoot strangers is a great way to get attention. I don't know if there's any greater conspiracy. I don't know if these are actors being paid, being compensated in some way, shape, or form by a much larger group, some indiscriminate, you know, what's the word I'm looking for? Starts with the I. Oh my God. Illuminati. Yeah. Some Illuminati types, or the people that go to the owl, whatever. I forget where that's at. But my point being is, whether or not these are actors that have been mobilized by a cabal of conspirators, I don't know. But here's what does make a point. It's a tragedy. It's god-awful, an unnecessary loss of life. A firearm was the weapon of choice. There's deeper-seated issues at play, but because the shooter was Hispanic, it destroys the desired narrative that it is white. Because right now we're living in a time, in the third decade of the 21st century, where the hot ticket item is heterosexual Caucasian male evil. And as long as it fits that narrative, you're golden. That is the soup du jour, so to speak. That is the desired position, is heterosexual Caucasian male evil. Because this was a Hispanic male, it violates the general order of things. It violates the narrative, and it disrupts the flow. Specifically, social media and news media. And Stephen really hyper-focused on this, and I think he did a pretty good job of it. He goes into how, and it was so funny. He was doing like these predictions on what the media was going to do, and he was spot on. CNN specifically was looking for some connection to white supremacy, and they were making this up. They were literally making up their own facts. There's been no actual direct source, but CNN was just making this up because it has to fulfill their desired outcome. It has to support their narrative. Yeah, the bottom line was just a tremendous amount of hypocrisy in the media, where at the end, the one thing that Stephen said over and over was that instead of issuing a retraction, instead of saying we were wrong, we got it wrong, they changed directions. They just pretend like it never happened, like they were never wrong in the first place. And part of what he does with this is he kind of bounces and transitions a little bit, where the hypocrisy of creating a society of immorals and lacking in consequences. And him and Gerald and the Hodge twins kind of go back and forth about how we've created a society where there's been an utter lack of consequences. You can't win, nor can you lose. It's never your fault, it's somebody else's, so you can't get punished. That by producing a society of people lacking in morals, people lacking in conviction and foundational ethics, that there's always been some other reason for it, that, you know, the media has picked up on it, and the media perpetuates this, up to and including politicians like Kamala Harris, AOC, Elizabeth Warren, Nancy Pelosi, who's the one that looks like Magra? Not Feinstein, but Maxine Waters. You know, oftentimes in different ways, shapes, or forms, saying more violence until we get our way. Don't stop, don't quit until we get our way. Violence, violence, violence. But then equally and opposite, cherry picking what violence they disagree with. So there's an acceptable level of violence for the left, and only the left. And there's an acceptable level of violence for politicians on the left, and there's an acceptable level of violence for the leftist media. And then, God forbid, if anything does happen to happen on the right, it's completely unacceptable, it's completely uncalled for. And I mean, whether it's the choking victim, Jordan Neely being choked out, well, now that's a lynching. That's not self-defense. That's not diffusing a bad situation. Now that's a full-on lynching, demanding vengeance. Demanding vengeance. And even shows a video clip of black New Yorkers basically saying, okay, game on. All right, vengeance, vengeance, vengeance. This is George Floyd 2.0. We have to respond and react. And I personally think it's a tremendous amount of hypocrisy, but I don't know what the answer is. And I say that not to take the easy way out, because Stephen goes on to say one last thing, where he elaborates on the concept of race, not action. Where if it's the right race, it's not their fault. All right, and they don't focus on the actions. They focus on why it's not this person's fault, why they're a victim, why they were acting appropriately. But if it's the right race, the white race, then it's all about racism and the race, and not about the actions, where regardless, there hasn't been enough focus on the actions. Like trying to attribute some form of white supremacy to the Hispanic shooter in Texas. I don't care that he was Hispanic. I don't care if he was gay or straight. I don't care what his skin pigmentation was. Ultimately, what I care about as a gun enthusiast, as a Second Amendment enthusiast, as somebody who wishes to maintain firearms for the sole purpose of defending myself, my family, and my property, if against no one else other than a tyrannical government, I don't want my rights infringed upon, because this is a great opportunity for leftist lawmakers to do so because of this event. So the event will matter to the lawmakers, but the media and other lawmakers will focus on other narratives. And the fact that this shooter doesn't fit certain narratives, you can see that the media is trying to create reasons to support their pre-existing notions and pre-existing narratives. But I'm curious to know what you think. Admittedly, when I say I don't have the answers, I do, but I don't. I think we need to take a page out of Morgan Freeman's book, and we need to stop focusing on race so much and start treating each other like people. But there are people who are heavily invested in the concept of race, where without race and racism, or any semblance of that, their purpose ceases to exist, and they don't know how to live in a world without it. So they perpetuate it. People like Al Sharpton, so on and so forth. And what also bothers me too is, how do you fight belief? For people that have religious convictions and religious beliefs, they're not going to overturn, even though you can you know, provide them with countless evidence and countless facts pertaining to like Big Bang Theory, you know, so on and so forth, you're not going to shake their beliefs. For people who believe in a particular concept, it's going to be very difficult to get them to open up and listen to alternative thoughts, especially if they're dedicated to it. And I'll leave you with this. We're so hyper fixated on the fact that racism exists in the United States in one spectrum only, and that's white versus everybody else. I dare you to open your mind to the concept that anybody can be racist. You can be any particular melanation, you can be any particular pigmentation, and feel superior to others, and denigrate others, and put others down, and look at others as being inferior because they don't match you, and that can be racism. All right, I don't know why we're projecting this narrative that racism is a one color spectrum thing. It's white versus everybody else. No, anybody can be racist towards anybody. Native Americans have consistently been racist against white people, and you know, in their mind they have justification for it. If they believe that, they believe that. How are you going to tell them what to believe? All right, I don't have to like it, I don't have to approve, but I have no business saying no, your belief is wrong, because all that's going to do is further inflame their belief. If black people believe that they're superior to others and that other people are inferior or wicked or evil, the people that believe that believe that. I mean, look at the actions that took place as a result of belief in a particular concept, like racism in America. You know, why we had to justify taking the land the way that we did from Native Americans because of a belief system, enslaving Africans the way that we did because of a belief system. I mean, we fought hard to overturn it, but it's almost like, if you will, Alex Jones, there's a cabal of individuals dedicated to trying to create a somewhat reverse spectrum of that, putting white people at the bottom. I don't believe their goal is to legitimately put white people at the bottom and make white people the minority. I honestly think, and nobody's questioned me on this, nobody's called me on this, I honestly think that if such a conspiracy exists, if such a cabal exists, I don't think their goal is to raise and empower people of color / minorities. I think if such a cabal exists, if such a conspiracy exists, their goal is to infuriate these people, the people of color, the quote-unquote other than white minorities, to push and push and push to where eventually white people have to literally lock arms and band together and fight back for their own self-preservation, which, depending on how that fight is taken, whether it's politically, legislatively, you know, my thought process is they're looking to pursue it in more of a violent way, like a Civil War Part 2, where it's either an us versus them. The problem is we don't have clear boundary lines. We don't have the Mason-Dixon. We don't have the North versus South. We are literally divided in every state. I think your major population dense centers, like your metropolitan areas, like here in North Carolina, we have Raleigh and the greater Raleigh area, and then we have Charlotte and the greater Charlotte area, where you'll probably find the highest concentration of lefty liberal blues that, you know, may get to the point of wanting to take action. And I think that exists in almost every state, well, where it feels like some states have inherited a blue identity. And I hate to put it in such context, I hate to frame it such ways, but I think you'll have internal civil wars at the state level that branch out into the neighboring states. You know, like, as an example, like, once North and South Carolina take over their respective major hubs, as a hypothetical, whether the blue wins or the red wins, then they'll help to spread out to like Georgia and Virginia and so. I don't know. It's just a thought exercise, one that I hope never comes true, but it begs the question: what's the end game? What is the end game? Why do you want to push such hyperbolic narratives? Why do you want to push such negative narratives to, essentially pit each other against each other? And the question I have is, I don't know if we've been doing this for years. I don't know if it's always been this way, and I've only been paying attention for a short amount of time. But if I could go back in history and do a deep dive, I can see that for the scope of mankind, or the scope of America, it's always been this. It's just business as usual, and the tide has to ebb and flow. I don't know. But ultimately, I'd like to hear from you. I know a lot of us can't necessarily afford to pay to get beyond the paywalls where we can have discussions with some of these more popular individuals. That's not a slam against those individuals. It's how they make their living. I'm free. I'm not monetized. I'm not making any money off of this. If you come across this and you want to get involved in the discussion, that's fine. If you have a different point of view, that's fine. My main desire and goal is that we're civil, and that we can have these discussions, and that we can either agree or disagree, but talk to one another, identify each other, and be like, okay, well, I can appreciate how you might think that way, or how you feel that way, or here's how I think and feel. I understand, maybe we just disagree on this. Hopefully it's not such a severe disagreement that we've got to, But I'm just trying to open up the opportunity for discussion. And if you leave a comment, I promise I will read, react, and respond to it. And if you do, you're awesome. Till next time, stay safe out there.